basically on a sporulating bit of foliage. They stick out, they grow sporangium, which are on stalks. So they're designed to get snapped off in a droplet of water. And inside each sporangium are about 30 or so zoospores. And when they end up in the water droplet ends on a suitable plant, the packet opens and the spores will swim out. And then they'll actively swim into a plant through the lenticels, the natural cell openings in a plant, or through a damage caused by a wound. So that's what they'll do, and they'll grow into the plant. At the same time, the Phytophthora morum also produces chlamydospores. These are long-lived resting spores, survival mechanisms. So they'll be shed into the litter and soil of the underneath the affected plant, and they can be splashed back up from the litter by rainfall back up onto that plant, and then they'll grow out into the plant and then cause the same damage inside the plant as the zoospores will do when they get established. Or they'll sit around, and they're very UK proof. They'll go to minus 18 degrees up to 40 degrees centigrade. So you don't need to worry too much about climate change. Gated on sites and returned after a number of years, and found even after 7 years of investigation, you're still able to go and have active and living Phytophthora. So not just picking up DNA of ramorum, but actual Phytophthora ramorum capable of growing out onto a petri dish. So good at surviving, good at swimming around, aggressive. Problem, yes. And in the UK, the main issue is it was brought in on the ornamental plant trade, causing minor dieback and a whole range of plants. It affects things such as pieris and camellias and viburnums and rhododendrons, ornamental rhododendrons. It was first identified in the wider environment in this country on a red oak tree, I believe, down in Kent, or is it East Sussex. But our main bugbear, our big problem is rhododendron ponticum, because that's what's enabled the Phytophthora to get from a garden situation to the wider environment. And I'm sure many of you have seen plenty of sites where you've got rhododendron ponticum has become unmanaged and established itself. And it's quite easy once you get into a large parkland situation for it to, once it's got into these rhododendron bushes, for it then just to go and spread between the bushes to bushes and out into the wider environment. So I urge you all to go and familiarize yourself with wilty looking bits of rhododendron and report them using tree alert, because all you got to do is take 3 photographs and then you can report it and put on a map or a postcode or however you want to describe it where you've seen the symptomatic stuff. But if we don't have people identifying Phytophthora ramorum at this stage of infection, because it's much easier to go and destroy rhododendron bushes, especially as there's grants to go and help people get rid of their infected rhododendron, then if nothing happens, if they're the right localized weather conditions, then you can have droplets of water from an infected rhododendron and it could be able to get carried up into a larch tree or sweet chestnut tree. And then we see more widespread problems, firstly because we found that larch has greater capacity for sporulation than rhododendron does. Rhododendron is an evergreen, so right wet weather conditions, it can spread around all year round. Larch is deciduous, so it's not a problem outside the point it doesn't have any leaves growing on it, but in that period, it's got its capacity on its foliage to make way more spores than the rhododendron does. And once it's got into mature larch, then you've got the microclimate of being 20, 30 meters up is different, and you're much more likely to be carried by some clag or drizzle from one side of a valley to another, or to a distant. That's what we've seen all over the country, all over the UK, in fact, not just in the Lake District, but we do have very suitable climate in Cumbria. As you can see, it's just a climate suitability chart for Phytophthora ramorum. It's not based on about factors, don't include where the host is, so it doesn't include where larch or rhododendron is, or what local microclimate that may be. But yes, you can see, funnily enough, any of you in Cumbria may be aware that occasionally the weather might be damp. Sometimes it might be suitable for something that's a water-loving creature that needs to be spread by waterborne transmission. And you can see overall where we've been finding Phytophthora ramorum historically has been the place that are most suited weather-wise according to this climate chart, but that's notwithstanding us finding it elsewhere. I'll show you on some maps. So I'll whiz through these a bit faster because these are just maps to show up until 2018. We were sort of seeing a year-on-year downward trend in England on the size of area that was being affected by Phytophthora ramorum. So we had a big glut back in 2010, which was the first year we properly did widespread surveillance for it. And you can see year on year, 2013 was significant. We had very suitable wet weather in the autumn of 2012 and in 2013, but you can see there's been relatively little action all the way to 2018. And then there was a more significant year. Last year, not so much identified. So, and we can see that in the volume of wood that's also been impacted in England as well. So downward trend up until recent. Now, at this point, I want to remember, and I've stuck it in this slide, so I just need to go and say thank you to the Observancy for everybody this year looking out for symptoms of Phytophthora ramorum, particularly in larch. And I've had reports from agents, I've had reports from Forestry England staff, not just on their own estates, but also because they're more, once you've become accustomed to and recognize the symptoms, your eyes are clued in and you spot it elsewhere. So I've had people on kayaking trips on Windermere, just on their time off, reporting suspicious symptoms. And I've had private landowners as well who've either experienced it in previous years or have seen it for themselves from nearby sites. And I must say thank you to everybody for reporting it, because the sooner we do find and identify a site, the sooner someone has the capacity to do something about it. We may potentially change what the outcome is for larch in that immediate vicinity. So in any normal year, we undertake aerial surveillance. This has been going on since 2010. And it involves, well, there's quite that helicopter is quite an ancient one. That one used to, for those who used to watch Treasure Hunt back in the 1980s, that was a helicopter. That is the very same one, which is now in pieces. So it's not quite as we're in a slightly more modern helicopter. But the run out of it is normally in a normal year you have a navigator at the front next door to the pilot and two photographers facing on the same side in the back. So you have GPS marked photographs taken, you have a track taken by the computer, and we go and establish and analyze the photographs, and you know where you've been and what you've been looking at. And here's some stats to go and show what. So normally on an average year, we'll have about 20 flights across England, and we'll go and cover about 34,000 or 30 odd thousand hectares of larch that we've identified. Of course, that's down to our knowledge of what stuff is in the public forest estate and what analysis has been taking place using aerial photography and people sitting down trying to go and work out where larch actually is. Now you see in 2019, there was a big drop in the number of flights. We only did 11 flights, and that's because our priorities were taken away from Phytophthora ramorum in a number of ways. So in the beginning of the year, we were involved in significantly, there was a spruce bark beetle outbreak that was confirmed in Kent. So Ips typographus is a very significant pest of spruce in mainland Europe, and it was found for the first time down there. So there's only 5 of me across the whole of England, so there's a limited resource. So when something new happens like that, then we'll often get taken away and have to concentrate on that. Secondly, there are further findings of sweet chestnut blight, which again, that's another quarantine organism in new parts of the country. So we were told to go and respond to that. And finally, some of you may have been aware of the oak processionary moth situation last year, which ended up in the confirmation of oak processionary moth being introduced in large trees, amenity trees. So we had trees which have got a diameter of, of at least 7 centimeters, so fairly hefty trees that are being imported, and the eggs of those of the oak processionary moth were carried in, and then the moths went and emerged, and then people had to rapidly go and identify and follow back lots and trace back lots of stuff, and so we're involved in that in the summer. So that's is one thing that's kept our eye from being able to survey as potentially well as we could have done in 2019. I'm sure that certainly had an impact and for finding out what's been going on this year. And this year, you can see we've managed 20 odd flights, and we've covered a similar quantity of larch as in 2018. But you see the photographs below from my colleague Mick. Because of the pandemic, where we normally have 3 observers in a helicopter, now it's been a single observer facing backwards in the helicopter. We are unable to open the door of the helicopter to take photographs. We just have a slidey window. As a door is a 2-person operation. And so we've only actually got 1 pair of eyes, and that person's trying to go and be the navigator, mark things up and take photographs all at the same time. So I think there's a very strong likelihood that although we've covered lots of land, that we may well have missed stuff just as surely to human error, and that wouldn't be missed in a normal year when you've got 3 sets of eyes. I know I've been involved in a number of flights this year, and I know I've missed at least 2 sites in the Lake District that are blindingly obvious, and I wonder, you ask yourself afterwards, why on earth did I miss that site? But thankfully, both of them got picked up on the ground by people who reported it, so they didn't get missed entirely. But it just goes and highlights that humans are human, and only 1 pair of eyes does mean, I think, that there may well be stuff that has yet to be identified that normally would have been identified. On a more positive note, changed our system of work. So we've now got handheld systems. So previously we were paper-based, and you'd take photographs and then you'd upload things to folders and move folders around. Now we've got a live system where an inspector can now identify immediately the target sites. So the individual, because we normally identify down to an individual tree, so you can get within 10 meters of the suspect area pretty easily, unless it's a large area of obviously symptomatic stuff, in which case an inspector doesn't need to hone in on a single tree. So that has been improved, and it also meant that the photographs taken by the inspector can be associated to that target, and the reports could be made up and sent back, and then a woodland officer, who's the person that ultimately has to issue a statutory notice, can see all that data, and it's compiled in a single place. So things have moved on. The 21st century is catching up with the Forestry Commission, and so our systems are improving in some ways. That's good. And that means that we can also interrogate that system, so the woodland officers and their managers can go and see what's been going on. So the map and the image below shows that across the whole of England this year, we identified more than 480 target sites were picked up. And of those, 241 of them had clear evidence of Phytophthora ramorum. Now you see the map on the top that in the Northwest and West Midlands region, and the red dots are positive sites, 155 of those 241 sites were found within the Northwest and West Midlands region. And if you look at that map, most of those red dots are predominantly in the further north areas, so Lancashire and the Lake District area. So that's you can see that we've had a lot going on in our neck of the woods. Our inspection data shows that, well, we've found 24 new 10-kilometre squares that have had infected larch this year. So that means previous years, where if you find an infected site, you usually wouldn't be too surprised to go and find another infected site immediately adjacent to it. It wouldn't be astounding knowledge. So it tended not to spread out, radiate in many kilometers at any one time. So what we've seen this year with that new large number of new 10-kilometre squares becoming infected shows there's an association, which I point back to rhododendron and keep saying it's all about that rhododendron. And I think the rhododendron is the driver behind this, the good weather suitable for Phytophthora and the presence of rhododendron. You'll see that this year, 2020, 53% hit rate of the target size identified turned out to be positive. So it's a good rate of hit, seeing what we've had in previous years. But with that warning going back, that some of those sites, I think we may well have missed further sites just because the single person using the aerial surveillance. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were potentially even more target sites than this, but they just haven't all been picked up. Right. Okay. So here's two maps. The map on the left shows the 10-kilometer squares I was talking about. This is a map from so the situation up to this season, this year. So anywhere with a red outline, there was somewhere where Phytophthora ramorum was confirmed in 2019. Any square that's completely red was a new 10-kilometer square. And you can see in England, there were no new 10-kilometer squares found in 2019 at all. All the infected larch sites were found in previously known infected squares. You can see there's a lot going on in Wales, in North Wales, and you note the number of 10-kilometer squares in Wales has almost, even by 2019, had almost filled up the entire country. So you can see there's quite an issue going on there with Phytophthora ramorum and larch in Wales. And in Scotland also, there's quite a lot of activity going there. But not that many new 10-kilometer squares. You can see there are some squares on the Isle of Arran, which has got into the BBC News recently, because they've got this year significant areas of their larch were infected. But following on, you can see that Arran was known to be infected last year, so that's not such a great surprise. The map on the right, you can see, just looking at the data from England, that again, the red outlines are known positive sites in 2020, but there were 10-kilometer squares where infection was previously known in that 10-kilometer square. But the solid red squares are newly found 10-kilometer squares, and you can see the northwest, particularly around the sort of Peak District region. There's a whole new area there, sort of in the Sheffield Peak District area, of new sites where there hasn't been any known infected sites there before. There's a site also in the Midlands, practically in the center of England, and a number of in our sort of patch on the Lancashire, Cumbria, Yorkshire area. So we'll go and have a look closer at them in a few slides. So here's next sort of map. So there's all the target sites with all the various colors, and all the sites that inspectors marked up as symptomatic are red. And you can see there's a lot of red, again, in the northwest in our sort of patch. There's a couple of anomalies there where inspectors found larch that they marked up and said was symptomatic because it was dieback, but it was caused by other factors. We have seen the image, the bottom right image. You can see that there's beetle activity. We've had lots of activity with larch bark beetle, Ips sembrae. That's a relative of the spruce bark beetle that is causing big problems on the continent at the moment. And it usually picks on trees that are stressed out by some other way. So if they're stressed and it's a secondary pathogen, but when the weather's really suitable, it can build up into large populations and pick on healthy trees next door to it. So that's been picked up across the country. And also in the southwest and in the central Midlands, we've had unexplained dieback. So you can see this image on the top of anomalies. There's the trees definitely going brown and dying back. When you look closer in the image on the bottom left, the foliage is wilting. So it doesn't look the least bit like Phytophthora, where we get lots of resinous lesions associated, and if you scrape under the bark, it's all brown and dead. This seemed to still be alive under the bark of the fine shoots, but the foliage was dying off, and eventually the whole tree died. So unexplained stuff. There's always something new for us to go and worry about. And here's some photographs, just some typical aerial photographs, and where in some years we go and say it was worse in one part of the country or one part of the UK than others, we've seen areas of heavy symptoms across the country in different places. So the Lake District is an image from Grisdale. The Peak District, that's the valley that heads down towards Matlock from Chatsworth House, that sort of area. Southwest England, I think that's near Oakhampton and Wales. Well, there are so many photographs that look like that across central and northern Wales. That could be any one of those locations, really. So there's been a lot of heavily symptomatic larch, where in some years we may just pick up symptomatic trees with mild crown dieback in 2 or 3 trees in a stand, for example, sometimes just a single tree with a few branches. So here's some close-ups, 10 kilometers and of just south of our area. So we've got those burgundy squares are new areas of previously unknown infection. And the thing again is back to rhododendron. When we've been to the, is there a laser? There's a laser thing. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to laser pointer. Okay, I shall do some lasering. So that square there, for example, So that's a new area that wasn't found before, and we've flown that area plenty of times. And when you get into the site, the larch is newly infected, but the rhododendron throughout the site there was heavily infected. So it looks like it got into the rhododendron and spreads the larch. Likewise, this site here, that was a site where to the northwest of Skipton, a state with a lot of pheasantry involved, lots of infected rhododendron on the site. We've flown that area every year and nothing there. The only interesting site which no association with rhododendron, I would say, is this site here near Saddleworth Moor, which I'll go and talk about later because there's a biosecurity implication for that site. And this site here, which is in Langstrothdale, I think the name of it, in the Yorkshire Dales, where there's no rhododendron on site at all. So that makes me think that there probably is some other infected site that's got infected from rhododendron that didn't get picked up in the aerial surveillance around there. But there's a lot of sites identified in this area where we had a significantly infected rhododendron underneath infected larch, and also sites where there's significantly infected rhododendron sat underneath healthy larch. So I've been to a lot of sites which are a bit like ticking time bombs, where if people don't get rid of the larch, then the rhododendron, then eventually the weather will go and bring that from the rhododendron into the larch, and that larch will subsequently become infected. But perhaps if they get rid of it, they might be able to do something about it. So right, into our hood here. So I'm now well aware that I'm now into 24 minutes worth of talking in a 20-minute presentation, sorry. So if you go and have a look here, you can see most of what's been going on in the Lake District is involving sites that have been infected in previous years. So it's not that surprising, really, if you think about it, that we've had Phytophthora ramorum has been in the Lake District since 2011. Since the first years we've investigated up here, we found it. So although it's never been good news, we've had a decade of Phytophthora ramorum in the Lake District, and we still haven't lost all the larch. So the areas that are new, this is down to a single site. These two squares up here, down to a single site that straddles two 10-kilometer squares. And again, this site is one without any rhododendron, and I think there may well be a biosecurity connection to how it got introduced there. This new site here, just to the east of the M6, that definitely has a rhododendron implication. There was a heavily infected rhododendron across the site, and I think the wet weather had brought it into the larch there. This site here, well, you can see it is between two previously known infected sites. So actually, it's more like localized spread has probably brought that to that area. Right, what am I going to show? So this is close, I'm trying to remember what the presentation was. So these are all the targets that have happened across Cumbria this year. And as you see, they are pretty much extensively happening in the Lake District. The one outside the Lake Districts, that's the area crossing the two 10-kilometer squares I was talking about. We had a target literally up on the border, which was interesting but negative. And then we've got the one site on the east of the M6. Everything else is concentrated in and around the Lake District. So looking at what's going on the western coast, we've had heavily infected stands in Blangdale and Wasdale and Ennerdale back in 2013. There's considerable areas of larch there, and there still is larch left in Ennerdale beyond, even though we're talking about 8 years of the ramorum being in that area. So it's not so great a surprise to think that there's been spread in those valleys. It's just the weather has allowed quite significant areas to become infected. Likewise, we know for a couple of years we've had problems in the sort of Grisdale and Tarnhouse region, and it's not surprising with very conducive weather that we've gone and seen more areas become infected around that. And unfortunately, the weather this year has meant that spread has continued and been brought to quite a considerable area to the north of Coniston and up to the edge of Langdale and across to Ambleside. So that's a sort of like a weather forecast. But over here, we've got some concerning findings which are new in the Kent Valley. I think it was Kent is a valley with the Kenton, isn't it? I'm not just imagining that river. but we have had previous findings in the next valley over in previous years. So again, although it looks distant from what's going on here, as the spore flies by soggy weather, it's just the other side of a valley. So again, not too outrageously surprising. Right, okay, I was going to try and speed it up. Going back to rhododendron, look at the quantity of sites where infected rhododendron was found in infected larch sites in the northwest and in the Lake District. So it's the rhododendron. So, at the very least, you come back and said he kept going on about rhododendron in this presentation. He couldn't keep to 30 minutes or 20 minutes. And when I talk about symptomatic rhododendron, I mean heavily symptomatic rhododendron, the sort of stuff that people wouldn't have missed if they'd been out there looking for it. And that's another problem, is that we have Animal and Plant Health Agency inspectors, but they're all very tied up in the impending EU exit. They're very much concerned about what's going to be happening on the 1st of January. Also, although there are increased resources, they're not available for doing reconnaissance work to go and try and find new sites of infected rhododendrons. So that's why it's even more important that people like yourselves are aware of the symptoms and go and report them. Bilberry, because vaccinium, blaeberry, whortleberry, whatever you call it in your local area, it can infect that, and then it's not a massive sporulator, but it's capable of killing itself off. As you can see on the map on the left, that we found a couple of confirmed sites in the Lake District. There was also another site confirmed recently that I was too slow to get on the map down in just south of Birmingham as well. So it's out and about there, and the last thing we want is to go and start destroying our wider environment because of the high value of this as a native species for our upland and lowland heathland. And that's a really hard thing to go and look for as well, because it's quite time consuming. And sweet chestnut, not very common in the lakes, but again, we found it used to be thought of as just a problem in the southwest, but this year, a considerable amount of sites found in the southern end of the north, or is it the northern end of the Midlands? I don't know what you described, the top of the Peak District and Cheshire and stuff like that. So it can happen anywhere where the weather's suitable. So here's some pictures of bilberry. It's better to go and look for symptoms at this time of year because the foliage can often hide it. So when looking for patches of unexplained dieback, so here and here, and then when you look closer, you see banding. So you'll see sort of stripes, brown and green stripes going, so brown going between what should be healthy and green on these shoots. So if you happen to go and see an area of dieback in bilberry, keep an eye out and then go and report it. Sweet chestnut dieback, who get symptoms on the foliage, often get blackening, a bit like you can see on rhododendrons as well, heading down a central vein of the leaves. But when it gets established in a big tree, it will kill the tree outright from the crown working its way in. So it's a terminal situation for that affected tree. And sweet chestnut are capable of having the same weather conditions to go and spread it to other stands in the same way larch can as well. And just to show that we've had really good Phytophthora weather, I've been picking up other infected species that I wouldn't normally do, because I'm normally, being a forestry person, you'll normally be happy if I could pick up some rhododendron, the occasional beech tree and some larch, and that's pretty much my lot. But this year, apart from the beech, these are typical black bleeds you see on an infected beech, I've picked up infected magnolia. I've been infected alternative exotic rhododendron species. I've picked up infected viburnum, and I've picked up infected granfir. And 3 out of the 5 photos are taken from sites within the Lake District, and all those photographs are taken. Actually, 4 out of 5 of those photographs are taken within the Lake District, and the other one was in the northwest of England. So yes, it could, anywhere where these situations can build up, then you can have a problem. This is just an image just to show the landscape impacts that we're seeing in the lakes this year. So this is a view looking east. So over here, we've got Lake Windermere in the corner. So this is the north here. So this is the bottom end of Langdale and Chapel Styles, somewhere over there. So I'm stood on this hill with the infected larch in front of me here. You can see the branch dieback or the total crown dieback here. And we've got an infected stand in the foreground, over getting closer to the Lake Windermere, by the edge of Windermere. On the other side of the valley, just on the peeking over the edge of the hill before you get down the valley with Ambleside, and then multiple sites all the way up. So although the level of infection in those sites is low, the impact on the landscape that's going to have to happen to respond to this Phytophthora is going to be significant. So the low number of trees belies the fact that actually a significant number of larch are going to have to be dealt with in the next upcoming months. I was just go back to 2 slides ago, gardens will become infected as well. And walking past garden situations, again, this is more territory for a plant health inspector rather than mine. But again, it just shows what a bumper year it's been for Phytophthora, the fact that I've just happened across places like that. I'm going to ram on about biosecurity for a moment, because I've seen a lot of sites associated with pheasantry often associated with rhododendron. And because we know those resting spores have the capacity to be carried in the soil and litter, if people aren't cleaning their footwear or their equipment between sites, then there's a real potential that you could introduce the spores to a new site. And if there is rhododendron there, then you could start the whole cycle off there. And this is the site I was going on about near Saddleworth, where I think there is a direct biosecurity connection, because there's no public access to this wood. There's no rhododendron in the wood. And lo and behold, where the symptomatic tree that has appeared is right beside a big pheasant pen. And the only other symptomatic trees are just in a green open, on the edge of a green open end, going down a steep slope to a reservoir at the bottom. So yes, it's an interesting new 10-kilometre square, and I think it's probably been human influence to that. The site I was going on about in that square, just the 2 10k squares at the site straddle just outside the Lake District, I believe potentially to have been brought there by a rally, because the agent went and brought this up as a likely suggestion, and I'm inclined to believe him, because the symptoms you can see here, that the crowns of the affected larch are looking okay, and it's the lower branches that are brown and having dieback. And this is a sharp corner where the cars have been charging up at speed, and I could just imagine dust being carried up into those trees, because the only affected larch in this wood are ones close to tracks, and this is the last stage of a rally that passes through a number of sites in the Lake District. So it's intriguing. And there you go. So you can. So I'll have to cover myself as this is being recorded. So yeah, it wasn't me. I didn't really say this. But yeah, I would say there's certainly potential biosecurity implications and potentially associated with the rally. So it all brings it back. Look for the rhododendron. Thank you very much for your observation. We have got grants to go and get rid of rhododendron, but to be honest, at the rate we're getting rid of it, it's going to take a few centuries to get rid of it. So we could do with us in the Forestry Commission being a bit more proactive. If we're serious about wanting to get rid of rhododendron, we're well aware that it's an invasive, non-native plant, and it's also a carrier of Phytophthora ramorum and Phytophthora canovii as well, 2 quarantine organisms. Well, let's get rid of it then and help encourage people to get rid of it, because until we've done that, then this risk is going to be across the country. It's all about the rhododendron, not about the larch. And we've got to battle against this, because even back in April 2019, so this isn't from yesteryear, this article, we're having to fight this sort of mindset as well. So we need to go and persuade people that actually the environment's better off without rhododendron ponticum. Fine, keep ornamental rhododendrons, individuals in the parks and gardens, that's the place for them. Rhododendron ponticum escaping into the woods and heathlands, blocking out natural regeneration and being a vector for Phytophthora. Let's not. So I just want to finish off, last slide, to go and say there is still larch in Cumbria. So one of the things at the beginning of lockdown that we started doing is doing the latest version of aerial analysis to go and find out where larch is so we can target our surveillance. So all the yellow dots on the left, you can see that was the larch we'd identified in 2014. And all the purple dots are stands of standing larch that was on aerial photography that I was looking at in April and May this year. So, up-to-date aerial stuff from Google Earth. So, although a lot of considerable and lot of the purple dots are going to be affected in the Grisdale area, you can see there's still a considerable area where there's lots of larch in Cumbria. So the Eden Valley, all around there, there's plenty of larch left to protect. in Cumbria, and there's still plenty of larch to go and protect in the Lake District as well. So it may seem like a doom and gloom thing, and it's never good to be affected. It's never good to have something that is introduced, but our management of Phytophthora ramorum is slowing the progress, and every decade you get of extra growth is more increment and more value for the trees. So that's me pontificating, and that's me doing a 20-minute presentation in 40 minutes. Sorry. But any questions if anyone's still awake and hasn't fallen asleep with it?
As always, thanks ever so much, Barnaby. And I like the finishing up slide of there's still larch out there, incredibly important. There's a huge amount of stuff crammed in your head. Who wants to access the contents of Barnaby's head and ask a question? I saw Gary had his. Do you want to stop sharing your seats?
Yes.
Barnaby, and then we'll be able to see. So I saw Gary had his hand up. I'm not sure anybody else has. If you do want to ask a question, either raise your hand electronically or switch your camera on so I can see it, or use the chat function. So Gary, over to you first.
Yeah. Hi, Barnaby. Hi, Neville. Two short questions, really. I think, well, hopefully short. We've got a couple of wonderful European larches, veteran trees that are about 50 to 100 meters outside of SPHN areas. We've had Phytophthora in our area for probably 5 to 6 years now, and there's been no symptoms on these veterans. What's your view about whether we should take them down or not? They're in quite inaccessible areas, so they'll probably either have to be ring barked or just felled and left. Second question is, what's been your experience so far with any carryover to Sitka and Douglas fir from ramorum in the Lake District?
Okay, so first bit, if they're individual larch trees, that's what it sounds like, or small individual clumps, then you going back to the beginning about wet weather, so you've got to then it's got to get carried to those trees, and so it's not a surefire thing. So I wouldn't be necessarily in a hurry to go and fell those individual trees unless they get identified as symptomatic, because yes, like I said, even in Ennerdale, which was very heavily affected in parts back in 2012 and 13, there is still larch there immediately adjacent to the areas that were felled, and they had to do a lot of chemical killing there as well, because someone had the foresight to go and plant on inaccessible scree slopes there. So I wouldn't preemptively encourage anyone to get rid of their larch unless there was a very good financial reason for it. I mean, if you think, oh, I might do a thinning in next year or the year after, and I might go and put that up the plan up a year faster, well, that seems to make sense. But yes, to create extra work for yourself just for a few isolated individuals, and it's going to be down to how your neighbors respond as well, because yes, it's the combination of is everybody else going to take it seriously and take the trees down? And I know your geographic location, there's a lot of National Trust stuff around there, and they have been taking it as seriously as possible. And notwithstanding the problems with the pandemic, I know they've been getting on and already been felling affected sites in that sort of area. So it's yeah, I can't guarantee it and promise it, but hopefully they'll be there for years to come. That's me with my hat on, as long as they haven't got any rhododendrons sat underneath them, because that's what's gonna that could probably, you don't want to go and set that off. The second part of the question, there's a whole lot of other forestry trees that could get infected. They're terminal hosts. They don't sporulate, but if they're nearby infected larch or sweet chestnut, then they could potentially go and also get infected, and then that individual tree will eventually keel over and die, but it's not going to spread from that. And Sitka spruce is very robust as a species to Phytophthora ramorum. Although it is on the list of susceptible hosts, it's only been found with very fine shoot dieback. It seems to be able to compartmentalize the attack by Phytophthora and hold it off, in the same way our native oaks are also very robust to it. So although it's been found in American red oak, when it's been found in Quercus robur and Petrea, it's in very fine shoots, and then the tree seems to be able to go and cut it off and stop it. So don't worry about Sitka spruce. Don't worry about your other hosts, such as Douglas fir or grand fir or noble fir or Lawson cypress or western hemlock. As long as you plan to do something with, if you've got infected larch and you do something about it, the quicker you do it, then you're taking away those localized spores. It's so if you're right next to someone who's really sick and they're coughing all over you, then there's a fair chance you might go and get the cold they're hacking all over you. But if you go and make that person, chop them off at the knees, then it's for this analogy. If you get rid of them, then the risk is taken away. So the things, plants such as Douglas fir, we do find it, and I did find a Douglas fir site this year. It was picked up as a target site closer to Derwentwater, Bassenthwaite. It's up that sort of way. And when I trudged across this godforsaken ground full of brambles, got to the other side, it was heavily symptomatic, but it was a Douglas fir rather than larch. So that's better, because unless you want to go and fell and convert that individual fir, you don't actually need to be issued with a statutory notice, because it's not going to sporulate from that. So yes, it's keep your worries to the rhododendron and larch if you're going to have sleepless nights about anything.
Okay, thank you.
Good question, Gary. There was something in the chat from Mark asking, could we signpost some images of ramorum and larch so people can keep an eye on it? If I just pass on your email address, Barnaby and Mark, then you can share that stuff, if that's okay.
Or even I could potentially go and just send you a PDF of something with symptoms, and then you could send to anybody who wants. They can all have it. That's not a problem. I'll get organised.
If anybody does want that, then just send an email to Claire, who organised today, and we'll send that through to you. Any other questions before we wrap up? Great. So not seeing anything else coming up, either hands or chat. Last chance to give people questions now.
I've
excellent. Well, as always, Barnaby, thanks ever so much. Incredibly knowledgeable, incredible detail. Thank you, and incredibly important stuff for us all to keep up to speed with. So thanks ever so much. Keep up the good work. Thanks from the team at Cumbria Woodlands for organising today. Good to see so many folk here on the call. So hopefully catch you all in the new year at some point. Thanks ever so much. Goodbye.
All right.
Hey, Mark, do you want to stay on the line?
Yeah, I'm still here.